Okay, and a very good afternoon to you all, very good evening or good morning, depending on which part of the world you're in. I know we have viewers and listeners around the world, both live and on podcast form. My name's Tony Travers. I'm Associate Dean of the School of Public Policy at the LSE, and I'm the chair for this evening's event on the impact of Brexit on higher education. This is an LSE event co-produced by the European Institute and the School of Public Policy. And before I say a few words first about the speakers and then about the content, I should add that the event has a hashtag, which is hashtag LSE Brexit. It's been with us for a number of years now, as indeed has Brexit. We've had a number of events, and there will doubtless be more in the future. What we're going to do is have the standard format. We will have three speakers, one after the other, each speaking for 7 or slightly more, slightly less, fewer minutes. And then questions and answers involving me and the speakers. And then we'll open it out and you can put questions into the Q&A function. I will be monitoring those and we'll try and get a fair and balanced selection. Good if you say who you are, where you come from, but you don't have to. And I will try and get all the questions, or as many of them as I can, in the time available. We will finish at 6:30. So our speakers are Dr. Beth Thompson, our panelist, I should say, Dr. Beth Thompson, who's Head of Policy and Advocacy for UK and the EU at the Wellcome Trust. Second, Professor Wendy Thomson, who is Vice Chancellor of the University of London, formerly an academic at McGill, and has worked in UK government in the past, national and local level. And last but not least, our own Professor Simon Hix, who is Pro-Director for Research and the Harold Lasky Professor of Political Science here at the LSE. So those are our panelists. They're going to speak in that order. So Beth, then Wendy, then Simon. But before they do that, I just want to say a couple of words by way of framing this event. I can imagine that pretty well every professional grouping in the United Kingdom and a number in the EU, many EU countries, will be holding events at around now about the impact of Brexit on, chemicals industry or cheese industry. In our case, it's about higher education, certainly about the fishing and fisheries industry. So, but of course, higher education is our business. And I think it's fair to say that HE, particularly institutions in the UK, particularly in London, have always been amazingly international. They've been able, in effect, to import and export, to trade across borders, bring people into and outside the UK, not only from the EU, and that's in a sense an important thing to remember. Very strong links to the United States, Latin America, Australia and New Zealand, increasingly India and Africa. So it's not as if higher education isn't used to dealing with changes in rules and border issues and visas and all of that. However, this is a major change because of issues such as funding streams, student exchange programs, research funding, research collaboration, and indeed the easy movement of students across borders and fees and a whole range of other issues. I won't go into them because we're going to hear more about this later. And I'm sure many who are going to join on the Q&A or want to have points to make on the Q&A will add their own thoughts. The University of London and its sister colleges, which LSE is one, obviously have roots into government. They can make their own statements. Individuals can talk to government. But I think it's fair to say, and this is the last thing I'm going to add at the beginning, that UK government at the moment, we're just talking about the UK perhaps today, but others may want to talk about EU governments, that the UK government has a lot on its plate at the moment, particularly because of COVID, but also because of the structural issue that there's a very powerful desire within the UK government to make sure that people believe Brexit worked, and it is not a problem. And so trying to correct and get our voice across, or to get HE's voice across with all these other industries and against this complicated background, I think is a really interesting political challenge, which I'm sure Wendy and Simon and Beth will all have thought about. Anyway, that's enough from me. Now, perhaps I can hand over to Dr. Beth Thompson from the Wellcome Trust. Beth, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here with you all. As Tony said, there's a number of aspects to the UK's future relationship with the EU, and a mixed settlement really overall if we look at research and student mobility as two areas with very contrasting outcomes. But so in my few minutes, I'm going to talk about the research outcome, particularly the Horizon results, so the future funding programmes and how that collaboration will work, research and mobility, which is also a critical issue, how we move our people across borders, and then I'll touch on some issues of regulation, including data sharing and clinical trials, before wrapping up with some thoughts on really how we deliver this as a meaningful partnership for the future. So starting with Horizon Europe, where there is really good news for research, and I think this is testament to some of those the efforts that Tony talked about in terms of how universities and other partners like Wellcome have made the case for continued deep cooperation with the EU. Effectively, full UK participation in the next framework programme, Horizon Europe, has been secured. There's a small aspect of innovation funding that's not covered, but we have European Research Council and the Marie Curie Sklodowska actions. UK-based researchers will be able to participate in and also lead those collaborative projects. The UK will also be able to participate in the ERICS, the infrastructure consortia that are led from the EU. And the UK can have more or less a full role in the governance processes associated with Horizon Europe, so that's the programme committees, but also participating in the European Research Area Committee and its subgroups. In that governance, the UK will lose its voting rights, but actually the status of observer in those groups is very meaningful. Issues rarely come to a vote, and therefore the UK is really has that same seat at the table as it has done in the past. It's quite unique, I think, that the EU has created a system of funding schemes through the Horizon programme where non-EU member states can participate almost to the same extent as a member state, and that's really what's happened here. I should say this is all subject to the Horizon Europe legislation being finalised, so that regulation is currently going through the last stages of its process in Brussels. So this is all based on a draft protocol between the UK and the EU. That does need to be finalised, and we're expecting that over the first few months of this year, but it's really a formality rather than anything more significant. Now, of course, this doesn't come for free. The UK has made a decision to participate in this way, and certainly from Wellcome's perspective, but across the research community, we see that as a huge positive. But we do have to pay for it. And this has really been the big complexity in the negotiations, was how to work out a proportionate participation fee for the UK, both in terms of the amount of money that it would bring back in terms of grants, but also the admin costs, and how that would be done in a way that made sure there weren't big winners or losers on either side if the UK success rate went dramatically up or down. I think we've landed on a solution that's based on the UK's GDP, and there are safeguards in there. So if the UK success rate goes up hugely, the EU is protected, and vice versa. If the UK success rate goes down, the UK is protected. So those costs aren't open-ended. There are some buffers there, but I think the simple kind of summary of all of this is that the stronger UK participation is across the Horizon Europe programme, the better value for money it becomes as a UK investment. And we know the UK has made the policy choice now to participate in this, but I think that's really important that we demonstrate that value as a research community as time goes on. And of course, one way to make that happen is going to be through the movement of researchers. So none of this will happen, none of it will work well unless researchers can move across boundaries, and we get that flow of people and ideas that's so important to make research work. Mobility is covered in the deal. There's a reciprocal agreement that facilitates mobility of researchers involved in the programmes. As you might expect in a treaty of this level, the language is quite woolly. So it talks about the UK and the EU making every effort within the framework of their domestic laws. Doubly complicated, of course, on the EU side, by immigration being a member state competence, but the intent is there, and I think that is really important. In the UK, largely, this is going to be implemented through the global talent visa. And I think it's helpful that policy and that position was in place to show that the UK could really deliver this. It's going to be important that as a community, we keep talking to government about how to make that visa work as well as possible for our community. Briefly on regulation, because although as a sector, we're used to working collaboratively as possible, there are some laws that are there to protect either the individuals, for example, who are participants in the work, or for privacy reasons. It doesn't affect all researchers, but for some, and particularly in Welcome's area of interest in the life sciences, health, the sharing of health data and clinical trial legislation is all wrapped up in this. So we might want to come on later in the discussion to talk more about the potential adequacy decision, but the way to ensure freest flow of personal data where that's used in research is going to be through a unilateral EU decision, and we're still waiting on that, but at least we've got an extension of the transition arrangements there while we wait to see what that looks like. But I think a really interesting question for research, if there isn't an overall adequacy decision to make this really seamless, is there something we could do in a sector-specific way? There will be some additional burdens for things like clinical trials, but I think actually the really interesting thing is the policy choice facing the UK when it comes to these big regulatory issues. Does the UK retain regulatory harmonisation effectively, or do we choose divergence? Of course, that's not unique to research. It's a huge question that the UK government will be grappling with, but it will have bearings on our sector as it will for trade in other areas. So what next? We've got a Horizon Agreement that sets the basis for continued collaboration, almost the same as member states. So we've got the individual awards, we've got the collaborative awards. So there's a real opportunity to be seized, and for that strong UK participation to create the value for money. But it's not just about the money, and I think that's so important, that making the most of this opportunity will mean the UK becoming a really active participant on things like the programme committees, the government stepping up and taking part in ERAC, the European Research Area Committee, as a really active member, because that will shape that overall environment that we're working in. But also, it's not just about the immigration rules, it's about the UK being a welcoming place to come and to be a researcher, and that is about tone, not just policy, and it's about the type of country that the UK is seen to be. And that's the point that I want to end on, is I think there is a moment here as we move into this new world for the UK to create a clear vision for what it thinks the UK's place in the world is as a research-rich country. And for me and for Wellcome, that should be about generous collaborative leadership on some of the big challenges that face us, like antimicrobial resistance and climate change, that research really have to be at the heart of solving. And I think Tony already made this point, EU and rest of world collaboration are not mutually exclusive, they actually facilitate each other. So I think we have to look at the way that we're working with the EU as a bridge to the rest of the world, how we're working with other countries, and look at the trade deals and opportunities that will help us demonstrate that generous collaborative leadership that will strengthen our research base here.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Just before I move on to Wendy, just given you hinted at the end there, the fact that the January the 1st and the 24 days thereafter have coincided with a big debate about the rollout of vaccine, and given Wellcome's interest, historic and current interest in this issue, are there any early signs, sort of optimistic, pessimistic, or that in a sort of, I mean, you would have thought, common sense would suggest that this is an all-embracing, all-affecting pandemic, and therefore it should be a spur to rational behaviour. Is there any evidence either way so far?
There's a lot to unpick in what you've just said, Tony.
Sorry, all right.
Let me just, I'll focus on one bit in particular about this question of vaccine nationalism, as it's sometimes called. I think this is a real area where the UK can show its leadership. We know nowhere in the world is safe until everywhere is safe. So there are good, rational reasons to make sure that we deliver vaccines to countries that can't afford them as readily as we can, as well as good moral and ethical reasons to do that. I think, I mean, I have some hope with the state of politics in the world now that the world is in a better place to be able to avoid that vaccine nationalism. And I think there's no doubt it's in the UK's interest, and it's as the UK taking on the G7 presidency, there is a moment here for the UK to stand up and be counted on this. Okay,
that's a very further optimistic, helpful and elegant reference to the American election as well, besides, I think. So thank you for that. Straight across, and we'll come back to you soon, obviously, Beth. Now, Wendy, over to you as our second contributor.
Thanks. I'm going to try and share a screen. I'll see how successfully I manage to do that. Perhaps I will. There we are. I guess it's a good, have I managed to do that?
You have. Yep. Good. Yeah. Nice picture of London in the old days.
Okay. This won't, I won't dwell on the slides very long, but I think, you know, this idea of global Britain and the EU relationship, big changes, it certainly, you know, just when you just think what's happened over the past decades, it's just a huge shift that we're going to be experiencing. And I think when you think how the higher education sector was probably largely seen as pro-European during that whole debate, that we need to, I think, reposition ourselves to sort of try and take what opportunities there are from sort of global Britain. So if I try and move this forward. Just a reminder, really, that we should have somehow been rather more prominent, I think, in the trade negotiations, perhaps, than it feels we have. I mean, you know, wry comments have been made about fisheries, but you could make more serious ones about financial services. You know, if these figures were just published before Christmas about the, you know, the way that education represents a very significant and growing part of our balance of trade. You know, these simple slides here show that the revenue from education-related exports and T&E activity increased to 23 billion in 2018, and that was, you know, a significant increase from 2010, over 46%. So, you know, a significant and important growing part of our balance of trade. If you look at it too, HE represents, you know, the majority, 69% of the total revenue of education exports. Now, I'm not going to go into these numbers in any sort of detail, but I think it does show you that, you know, we ought to manage to make ourselves rather more prominent in the debate of the European you know, on the European trade negotiations than we have done. I'm going to try. I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to try and now get this off the screen if I can. But I'm not sure I can. There we are, on screen. Thank you. So, you know, this is just to sort of put in context, really, that we have every reason to feel that we're an important part of the, you know, of the global Britain kind of trade and influencing, you know, agenda, if you like, and that somehow we've got to, I think, reflect on how we didn't manage to make ourselves more prominent in those negotiations than we did. I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but it's one I think we need to find if we want to influence the next stage forward. I'm going to speak just briefly about students, really, primarily. One, transnational education more generally is something that the University of London has been doing for many years. We started in the 19th century, and it's changed and moved in different ways, obviously, as technology and migration mobility has changed. The good news, I guess, in some of the stories around the trade agreements is that transnational education, as far as distance education goes, is one I think we can feel reasonably confident is going to continue as it has. I don't think necessarily, I mean, the proximity has probably meant that students have been willing to come from Europe to the UK. But if the obstacles to that are increasing, it might be that we need to consider, whether in-country study is something that should be a more important part of our offer and relationship to Europe and to European students. And if we put it into context, there's really only about 2% of students who study higher education outside their own country could travel. Most are going to study in country, and most are going to study through, increasingly, I think, through the sort of online and distance education opportunities. I mean, we'll be watching it obviously very closely because, we've got about 50,000 students in about 180 countries. Some of them are LSE students that we share, and as well as our other member institutions. But, so far it looks like existing provision is going to be able to continue as it has done in the past. So, that's at least one bridge on which we want to continue to build and see the opportunities. That's the good news, I guess. Then we move on to Erasmus, and I think it was disappointing. Most people were disappointed to hear that the Erasmus Plus scheme wasn't going to be continued for the UK. And you'd be forgiven for being disappointed, given that just about a year ago, the Prime Minister, in response to a PM question, when he was asked about the continued participation of the UK in the Erasmus scheme, is quoted as saying, "There is no threat to the Erasmus scheme. We will continue to participate." That was the Prime Minister a year ago. Now, we're not unfamiliar with changes of mind in recent months. We've become accustomed to it, but nevertheless, it looked like we were on reasonably solid ground. But I guess it's not entirely surprising if you look at it, in the harsh light of the kind of UK perspective that has been, overridingly important in the Brexit agenda and campaign. When you think about really that in the last 5 years, twice the number of EU students participated in Erasmus coming into the UK than UK students choosing to study in the UK. So, there has been a tendency for, us to import rather than export students in that program. And, if you look at the numbers, we still get really rather more students, more people studying from outside Europe as much as in Europe on these figures. I guess as well, if you look at the, the wealth of the students from the EU who tend to come to the UK, and compare them to the people who would come, students who might come from the rest of the world, it's reasonable to think that there might be a reason to be hoping that our students would be, looking at the rest of the world as much as to Europe. And also, I guess, hoping that this is hope over reality, that perhaps the scheme might become more reciprocal than it is currently, because I think that's one of the big critiques of the replacement for Erasmus Plus, which is called Turing. That it's at this point doesn't appear to be reciprocal. So in a sense, given the government's agenda, it's not entirely perhaps surprising that they want to focus on our UK students and their travels rather than the other way around. But I think that will be a huge blow to a lot of UK universities who have really welcomed European students here, and who for whom they make up a good and diverse campus experience that will be missed if the obstacles to studying here are as we see them now. So there's a number of critiques of Turing. As I've hinted at, it's not reciprocal. That's a major problem. Some people compare the amount of money that is currently being spent on Erasmus Plus and feel that the Turing amount, although it sounds good at 100 million for 35,000 students, when you start doing the maths, it's not really as generous as it might look on first look. And the Erasmus scheme was I guess, further subsidized by travel and student subsistence through other European development programs, which, represent a very big contribution to helping students travel and studying abroad. I guess there's also a question around tuition fees. I don't think it's been clarified yet whether or not tuition fees will be covered in the Turing scheme. And, that's a huge issue, greater in some countries than others, but important given that the rates for international students are quite often much higher than they are for domestic students. There's also all sorts of questions about, mutual recognition of credits and professional qualifications. How that's all going to be sorted out is still, I guess, to be seen. I couldn't let this moment pass without at least mentioning also language programs. We've got the Institute of Modern Language Research at the School of Advanced Study at the U of L. That's going to be a big obstacle to the movement of people that they've enjoyed up till now. But I guess finally what I would say is that the infrastructure of building these sorts of exchange programs is massive. I know when I was in Canada at McGill and we had, hopes of, having students travel, we sometimes pulled it off. But we're talking about handfuls of people and bespoke programs, which was just massive amounts of work and cost, really, that, we're starting from scratch. Most of the universities in the UK haven't got that infrastructure. And there's also the membership of European university projects, which many universities have benefited from, which again, we look at something like Circle U, which King's, one of our members, was fortunate to join in just before this agreement. Those sort of things are going to be a big loss. However, that's always the I think we have to look for the positives, because we have Turing, we could have had nothing, so how can we make the best of it? I think there was an article in Wonky recently by Louise Nicol, who runs the Asia Careers Group, and she suggested a sort of research agenda, that would place us in a stronger position when we come to argue for this kind of program again. And I think it's worth a look about, the data we didn't have this time and the arguments we couldn't make about the advantage to graduate outcomes and general benefits economically as well as socially that could come from a program that was, reciprocal and better funded than initially Turing looks to be. So, that's something that's our specialty, research. Let's position ourselves to make a strong case for it. And I guess finally, I would say, there will be little opportunities that, we need to make the most of. And we've got an institute in Paris, for example, that's, already some of our member institutions offer UK degrees out of the Paris Institute. We can do more of that. We've got study abroad programs based in Paris that a number of our member institutions make use of. These are small opportunities, but we start where we can and build on what we have, and I think that would be the way that I suggest we go forward. Finally, I just really I think I jokingly said as we were preparing for this talk, I came to Europe to avoid sort of what was in a nationalist phase in Quebec, and I'd only been here a few months when when Britain decided to leave Europe. It's been a bit of a personal disappointment, I would say, but I live in hope that the kind of way that Beth ended her talk, that we are continuing to be seen as a welcoming environment. I came here to study as a doctoral student. It was the place to go. I could have gone anywhere in the US, but the UK looked to me like the place to be. I think we need to continue to promote ourselves and feel confident, because I continue to believe that's the case. Anyway, I'll leave that. That's the student perspective, and happy to participate in the questions, Tony.
Okay, Wendy, thanks a lot. Just to, as I did with Beth slightly, just to ask you a kind of an immediate question. You sort of hinted at it at the end there. Given that, I know the war will never be over, as it were, but in a sense, January the 1st was at least the end of the beginning of it all. Something very new. There's no question of the UK immediately rejoining the EU. That's over. So I suppose, given your experience both in the academic world and in government, national government, do you think that there's now a space for policymakers to be encouraged to begin to think of recreating links that may have been lost? because there's no longer can it be seen as part of not leaving the EU, if you see what I mean. It's now done. So does it just make it easier to start, for people of goodwill to meet politicians of goodwill to begin to make post-Brexit new policy?
Thanks, Tony. Well, I guess I was trying to hint at that in terms of, we've got to get over this mourning period that some of us have perhaps been in for some time, because that's not going to fly at all in government circles. I mean, and really global Britain, I mean, what's not to like about that? We're international. We've got, say 50,000 students, 190 countries. We are international and we want to continue to be. When you think of the issues facing the world, they are global. They aren't just focused within Europe. So I think we are well placed to embrace this agenda and really, positively remind and advance to government the importance that universities bring to it. I mean, the soft power agenda, you could go on as we sometimes do, but I think we need to really position ourselves, we at the University of London want to be the largest exporter of UK distance education. We can do that, but if the government wants that to happen, we're going to have to work together on it, because it won't happen by itself. And I think there are a whole series of those agendas which we can very positively promote to government and sound more sympathetic to what they're trying to achieve than perhaps we've sometimes sounded in the past. I mean, the research agenda is also huge. I mean, and Beth's well covered that. I mean, UK research is global and should continue to be.
Okay, and I think it's fair to say a large number of institutions, notwithstanding Brexit and all the reasons for it, were already, and this is certainly true at the LSE, and I'm sure Simon will talk about this, beginning to set up institutes to study and to work with colleagues in Africa and South Asia and East Asia. And so in a sense, it's possible to do more than one thing at once, I suspect, and still to be part of a European family of researchers and academics whilst actually embracing others besides. Anyway, Simon, over to you, Professor Simon Hix from the LSE.
Thank you, Tony. Building directly on Beth and Wendy's comments there, the way I think about this is Britain is 80% services sector. Our largest services sector is the financial services and related industries. Our second largest sector is creative industries writ large, which I think would include higher education in that. So, film, fashion, art, design, media, and higher education. That's together, those two big sectors are the two largest sectors of our economy. They're both globally competitive sectors. And even within the creative industries, higher education is particularly globally competitive. So, I mean, it's in a sense, this idea of us either Europe or the globe, and we had this argument within some higher education institutions about what should be the strategy of British universities with Brexit, and some universities were saying it has to be Europe, 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 and others were saying no, actually there's no contradiction or conflict necessarily between being pro-European and being pro-global. In fact, and I think a place like LSE, we definitely see it like that. We see that our European connections, our European alliances are part of a global strategy. It's not a choice about whether we are European or global. We want us to be both. And so I think there are some challenges, and I'm going to go through some of them from my perspective. And I'm talking here as pro-director of research at LSE, but also from the perspective of being on the EU advisory group for the Russell Group, which I've sat on for the last couple of years. So I've been involved in some of the debates internally that shaping Russell Group positions. Also, I've been involved in helping to set up one of the European University Initiative alliances that Wendy alluded to, Civica. Civica is the alliance that LSE joined and has set up, and we are very concerned about its future, which I'll come back to. So I'm going to talk about four areas: student composition, research funding, faculty recruitment and retention, and then the European University Initiative alliances. Starting with student composition from LSE, we're a very unique university in the UK. We are the most international of all of the major universities in the UK. About a third of our students are UK students. About a third are from the rest of Europe. So, the other EU 27 plus other European countries, and about a third from the rest of the world, mainly from North America and East Asia. And so that composition we've had for quite a while. We are worried about that composition changing over time. And it's the way I think of it is, what we're worried about, for example, is if from next academic year, we have to charge all of our continental European students high fees, that could really have a detrimental effect on our undergraduate recruitment of continental European students. If you think that this will be going from £9,000 or just over £9,000 a year to £22,500 a year is our overseas undergraduate fee. It's a lot of money to pay, of course, to come and study at a place like LSE. We think our education is worth it, of course, but the differential between that really could put off a lot of continental European students. And I do worry about us losing continental European students in our undergraduate body. Those North Americans and those East Asians are coming to a place like LSE because we are international, because we have this mix. They don't want to come to a place like LSE and just be sitting in classrooms with just other North American and East Asian students. They want this to be an international environment they come to. So this actually only affects us, though, at the undergraduate level. About half of our students are postgraduate students. The differential in fees is not huge there. So although we are worried about this, it might not have such a big impact after all than some people were sort of claiming. I'll come back to this because it does relate a little bit to where we're heading with our European University Initiative and what happens then with the Turing scheme, and whether or not the Turing scheme, whether a new version of Erasmus or some element of a European pillar within Turing could develop. We still don't know what the strategy is of the government. I think a lot of British universities would be interested in developing a European element of the Turing scheme. And I don't see any contradiction between having Turing scheme as a global scheme and having a European part within that allows students to have exchanges sort of a bit like the Erasmus exchanges. When it comes to research funding, as Beth and Wendy have both alluded to, it is very positive that I think we're going to associate to Horizon Europe, and it's particularly important for a place like LSE for the European Research Council grants, the ERC grants, that are the individual scholar grants. They're very important for the social sciences, for us to be able to attract and keep global talent in economics, in political science, in sociology, and so on. We were very worried about losing that, and this being replaced by a British government scheme that would be geared much more towards STEM subjects, that would be geared much more towards industrial strategy type interests, rather than just funding research excellence. So we're very happy for this we're delighted that's going to carry on. But equally alongside that, it might be interesting that the British government is still thinking about possibly its own version of it as a slimmed down, that they called the UK Discovery Fund. The UK Discovery Fund was, I think, quite a clever strategy of UKRI. What they did was they came up with what would the potential alternative be if we did leave Horizon Europe, to, in a sense, show to the EU that the UK, if we did go it alone, we would have a scheme that would compete directly with Horizon Europe. And that was a little bit scary, I think, for Brussels and for Paris and for Berlin and other places, because the UK is a big global player in higher education and in global research. And they didn't want it to be a competition between the EU and the funding of research versus the UK and the funding of research. I don't think that would have been healthy for either side. And I am glad that we've come to a solution on that. And I think that's going to be very positive for us moving forward. Another area I find more difficult to know where we're heading on is in faculty recruitment and retention. About 40% of our faculty at the LSE are continental Europeans, so from the EU 27 member states mainly. We have not seen, if you like, a dash for the door, a sort of, a mass exit from LSE with these continental Europeans. But we are seeing people thinking, well, actually, maybe it's time for me to move my family back to Europe, to start actively looking for jobs on the continent. And at the same time, continental European universities are upping their game. They're seeing Brexit as an opportunity to attract talented faculty back from the UK. So, in the social sciences, we see that with places like Sciences Po in Paris, or Bocconi in Italy, or Stockholm School of Economics, or other great European, Pompeu Fabra in Spain. These are very good, equally also global universities, and they're seeing Brexit as potentially an opportunity to teach more courses in English, to attract students who might have gone to the UK, to attract faculty to come back to those universities. I think this is very difficult to predict. I think Beth alluded to the fact that this is perhaps less about policy and more about feel and the culture in the UK and how it feels to be a continental European academic in the UK. Is it a place you want to carry on raising your family? Is it a place that's open and welcome? And I think, you know, the jury's still out on that, I think, in terms of where the UK is heading. There's other elements of it that make it difficult for us to compete. If you think that Brexit actually is going to have a major hit on public finances in the UK, that could in turn have a major hit on public expenditure in universities, and that public expenditure in universities could be geared much more towards STEM subjects than SHAPE subjects of social science, humanities, arts. Equally, we've seen the government talking about skills, reskilling, changing the way or the criteria for higher education, perhaps 2-year degrees and so on. I mean, if higher education in the UK gets pushed down towards a much more instrumental, business-oriented, skills-type agenda, 2-year type degree programs, I really think that's potentially very dangerous for higher education in the UK, and I think that could actually reduce our competitiveness globally and reduce our ability to hold on to a lot of continental European talent who will think, well, now it's time for me to move and time for me to leave. And I think here we should be working with other services sectors. This is not just about higher education, this is about other services sectors. Beth, I think, mentioned the global talent visa. I actually think a conversation needs to be started about potentially an EU-UK blue card scheme, which was actually on the cards back in late 2016, early 2017. The discussion potentially of, yes, we don't want complete free movement of labour, as it was with EU membership, but potentially we can have some sort of visa scheme that's a joint UK-EU visa scheme you could apply to that allows you to have free movement for fixed periods, a bit like the US green card scheme. For global talent. I think a lot of the services sectors in the UK would find this very attractive. If you think about film, fashion, design, media, financial services, law, I can think a lot of the services sectors in the UK would find this very attractive because they are very reliant on that talent pool. Part of it's a global talent pool, but a lot of it is actually a European talent pool that we've been used to, and I think we'd benefit from that. So let me finish off then talking a little bit about the European University Initiative. So this was an initiative that Macron set up, that the Commission ran with, that set up these European alliances. We were one of 8 British universities that entered one of these alliances. So the 8 are the LSE, Essex, Edinburgh, UEA, Oxford, King's, Birmingham, and Warwick. So, you know, that's a lot of some of our best universities in the UK, part of these schemes. We joined Civica. So if you just get on the internet and put in civica.eu, you'll come up to the website. Civica is an alliance of LSE, Sciences Po, Hertie School in Berlin, Bocconi, Stockholm School of Economics, Central European University, the EUI in Florence, and NSSPR in Bucharest. In a sense, these are all our natural peers institutions in Europe. We did this for several reasons. We joined this alliance partly because we wanted to demonstrate to our students and our faculty that we can carry on being a European university as well as being a global university. And also for instrumental reasons. We thought this could allow us to carry on with continental European students in our classrooms if we develop these exchange programs within the European University Initiatives Alliance. So the jury's still out about whether we can carry on in this. What I'm hoping is, you know, at the end of the pilot phase, which finishes in September 2022, there may be perhaps a bespoke agreement that allows us to at least carry on as associate members of these alliances, because we've invested a lot of time, a lot of resources in this, as have the other British universities in these alliances. Erasmus Plus, we cannot carry on in, but I think I'm optimistic we'll find some way for us to carry on in these alliances. And I hope that could be through Turing, it could be through some other bespoke arrangement. So overall, I think there will be some impacts, and it won't be the disaster that some people are claiming it is for higher education. We are a highly competitive, globally oriented sector already. We will carry on being a world-leading competitive sector, but it will depend much more, I think, on what the policies of the British government are towards higher education going forward, as much as it depends on actually the terms of whatever the Brexit deal is. And that's, I think, where we should start to think about how we coordinate with other services sectors beyond higher education. Thanks.
Okay, Simon, thanks. And in slightly related the where you've ended and where Wendy ended as well, and Beth referred indirectly to the same issue. I mean, and the question of how far, as I was saying earlier, now in a sense the intense war about Brexit and what it would look like, and that the early stage at least is over, how would UK institutions best approach the UK government, which frankly at the moment doesn't have much bandwidth for anything, to convince them that it was in its best interest to be a little bit more thoughtful looking forward about sectors like HE and the creative sector that you also referred to, which frankly got virtually no look in at all from the angst at the end of the what you used to call rightly a thin trade deal that was finally signed.
Yeah, there's the politics of the Brexit deal, and I always thought we'd end up with a very basic, bare bones, goods-oriented trade deal, which, you know, I take no joy in predicting what we ended up with. But I always thought that would just be the beginning of the next stage. And after that initial, you know, politics of chest-thumping Brexit deal gets done, then we can really start the serious work about thinking about what types of bridges do we want to build back for our mutual interests. And, you know, we need to identify areas where we benefit in the UK from a change, plus so does continental Europe, so does the EU. And if you can articulate that, look, this is in our interest or our sector's interest in the UK, and it's also in the interests of the EU. So here's clearly something where we can build back a particular bridge. So the EU originally said no cherry picking in the original deal, but now the deal's done, it's all going to be all about cherry picking. It's going to be about the extra little bells and whistles, the little bridges that we add on, a bit like the Swiss have done. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity here, sector by sector by sector, for us to think about what really do we need for our sector to allow us to remain globally competitive and get the most out of our relationship with the EU, and where can we actually persuade the EU this is also in the EU's interest. I think that's how I would suggest that we think going forward.
And given that you understand the kind of corporate psychology of both the UK and the EU government machines, with something like the blue card scheme, which you just outlined yourself, and you just sort of say there's a sort of 50% chance that such a thing could come about within 5 years, or a 90% or a 12%? I mean, if you were a weather forecaster, where would you put your percentage for that one?
No idea, Tony. I mean, you know, there's lots of things that could or could not happen. A lot of it depends on the politics on either side that's really unpredictable. I mean, Brexit is sort of done and dusted. Not only is there no bandwidth on the UK side, there's almost no bandwidth on the EU side either. So it's really hard to predict. I do think this is one area where it is possible, you know, everybody will say, rather than doing these global talent visa things that could end up being incredibly bureaucratic, despite the fact that they'll try and make them as light touch as possible, there would be a possibility of, can we coordinate this? No one's going to argue about, say, giving an academic a 5-year or a 10-year blue card visa that allows them to live and work anywhere on the continent or in the UK. Once they've been granted that visa, are people really going to argue about that? I doubt it. That's not what the debate about immigration was about. It wasn't about high-skilled workers in higher education or the creative industries or financial services. Okay,
well, great. With that in mind, and this could be to Wendy or Beth as well, I'm going to move on to some of the questions here that are coming in. There's a question from Henry Kochi, who is an LSE alumnus. Now, there's a question, can you please elaborate on Brexit's impact on EU academics looking for work in the UK? And we just sort of touched against that. How will EU mobility of academics change? And I suppose the question I was thinking about when you were talking, Simon, and also Wendy, is that given the new rules, why would academics have any greater problem than American academics used to have, if you see what I mean? Or indeed Canadian academics, or any other country where there was, why would it be any different than it was for them?
I mean, I'm happy to go first, Wendy. But I mean, we've got a lot of adverts out now for recruitment for next academic year, and offers are being made, and we have our visa unit at LSE that's sorting this out. And the way I think of it is, it's slightly harder for EU academics than it was before, but not much. And it's slightly easier for academics from the rest of the world, but not much.
Okay.
In a sense, higher education has always managed to work around these rules, you know, and I do think that the the current visa regime for the UK for non-UK, for hiring and recruiting non-UK academic faculty is pretty open, pretty liberal, and pretty light touch, and that has not changed. And I think that's a positive thing. I don't know if Wendy and Beth agree with that.
Wendy, you presumably have travelled backwards and forwards on, or you may have passports in both countries, in fact. But anyway, I mean, what do you think? What does the university have a view on this?
I don't think the university probably has a view. I do think, though, that, you know, we have a lot of confidence in our ability to make these rules work. It's just about the disproportionate effort involved and the fact that, you know, you may be suppressing appetite for movement before it is expressed. And that's always a danger when this kind of thing happens. But hey, you're talking to someone who had to import academics to McGill, where we had French as the only official language, which came as quite a shock to some of them. So that was a bit tougher than some of these rules, I'd say. But even still, we managed to do it. So I'm sure we can. I think the thing is the messaging about being open and available, being a welcoming place to work, you know, a place that is going to facilitate open collaborations. I think that's really the key. And I mean, maybe I'll just pick up this other question. I mean, from my time sort of in government, you know, the bandwidth in government is incredibly thin, as everyone has mentioned. COVID's not going to be over anytime soon. And we've seen that, you know, there's a huge range of things still to be determined under the Brexit agreements, you know, the whole service sector, as well as everything else that's already in there. So, you know, I think I think we need to sort of see if we can be trusted enough to take on some of these challenges, work alongside government, and come up with, you know, kind of clever schemes of the kind that Simon's mentioned, but there'll be others like that, that will be in the interest of, you know, global Britain, and but also which nobody there has the time to figure out. And I think also probably, you know, anything that looks a bit pro-HE at the minute within government is probably career limiting. I hope that wouldn't be true, but I fear it might be. So overall, you know, somehow we need to find a way of sidling up to these these settlement agreements and see how we can begin to open up the box and start figuring out how some of these issues can be solved. We've got the talent. I mean, we've got it sitting in this room, but it's right across the HE sector.
And presumably departments like the Treasury and the Business Department privately will need no convincing of any of this. It's a kind of a matter of empowering the positive parts of government towards HE over those, for whatever reasons, of having other interests or wanting to. And by the way, you know, it's possible to invest in further education and higher education at the same time. We're always trapped into, it's a zero-sum game. So again, that message is saleable, is it not, to the right parts of government, you having worked in Whitehall?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, you know, I've worked in government, as Tony knows, many, many years, and many different kinds of politicians. I've retained a perhaps unfulfilled hope for rationality. But, you know, you have to, if without that, where does it go? So, you know, I think eventually those things do prove to be the case. You know, I think the recent spate of announcements are a mixed bag, you know. Some of the 4 or 5, you know, vocational qualifications, I don't think anybody could argue that's not in sad need of attention and investment. But, you know, so is level 7. You know, we're just never going to. There's not. You know, they need to sort of and completely closing down some of the grants for, you know, creative arts and performing arts. That's just one of UK's biggest exports. I couldn't agree more with the point that Simon's made. So there's lapses of rationality as well as glimmers of it, and I guess, you know, we just have to fan the fires of hope where we can find them.
And there is the issue of acts of commission and acts of omission here, which is very hard to work out which are which. Beth, do you want to contribute on this particular subject? Because I've got a question heading straight for you from the questions, but is anything, I don't want to rule you out from talking about this one.
Just briefly to say that I think there is a particular opportunity on mobility issues for academics with the Office for Talent, which was established last year. We don't really know what that is yet, but it shows an intent on the part of government to put some policy thinking into this. I think from what we understand, it's likely to be a pretty small team. So actually that thinking of the sector, I think there's a real place for that to coalesce. Simon's explanation of the visa rules is fantastic. But I think we know there are challenges about things like cost. And that's where I think the sector needs to really put its effort on making the most of that bandwidth that is there and the signal that we've had, and a science minister who actually is very collaborative at the moment.
Okay, now there's a question here in the Q&A from John Fairburn at the University of Staffordshire, who says, and I think this is in relation, and it's aimed for you, I think, Beth, that Switzerland had to set up a parallel scheme. I assume this means to Horizon or something akin to it, where bids first went to a Swiss office and then were put forward to the EU. Not sure if this was a technicality or whether any evaluation was done at that step. So how will it work in the UK? Can bids go direct to the EU or not? So is there an answer to that question? I'm assuming it's about Horizon as it moves on.
Great question. From everything I've heard so far, there are no decisions on how implementation is going to work. So we don't have an answer, but I would certainly urge the government to do it in as streamlined a way as possible and minimize that bureaucracy rather than have researchers jump through additional hoops.
Okay, any other, Simon, Wendy, want to?
No, Beth is absolutely right. There's a lot, the devil is in the detail. There's a lot of things that need to be worked out on Horizon, on our association to Horizon Europe, as there is on Turing. Whether or not they have the capacity at the moment to figure out how to fill in those details is unclear. I agree that I think the onus is on our sector to help the government work this out as effectively as possible. I know Wellcome does a lot of great work in this area, and that's, you know, we're all in our various different circles coordinating in different ways to do this. So I'm pretty confident they'll find a way through this that's pretty efficient. I'm hoping we get to a point where it's a sort of one-stop shop application. A UK academic can apply under the current scheme, and if the grant is awarded, there's just a sign-off from the British government that it will be covered under the scheme. But the worry, of course, that is there needs to be some financial constraint on this, and so there's going to have to be some sort of check against a sort of exploding number of UK academics getting granted projects that then the UK taxpayer has to cover the cost of, and so Treasury, I'm sure, is going to be insisting on some sort of check.
I think that's
Wendy, go on. Yes, please.
Oh, and just a footnote to that point. I think there's a few references to value for money in some of the announcements around Horizon. I guess that's the rabbit hole, you know, that we could descend into multiple and parallel reporting and details. And I guess that's the thing to watch.
Now, another Horizon-related question, they're taking us into fascinating territory, which I'm going to broaden out. This is from George Iliev, who is an LSE alumnus. Can the UK initiate a Horizon-style joint research program with China, given the growing academic power of Chinese universities? Now, I mean, China's a separate interesting issue all in its own right, but let's say China, I'm going to broaden it slightly, China or India, given that the government's off on a trade deal to India soon. Is there any reason why we couldn't begin as a country to keep the EU focused for Horizon, but start to do something similar with these large, important countries and blocks elsewhere in the world?
I mean, I can go on that because we've been involved in discussions about this Discovery Fund. So the Discovery Fund was like a British version of Horizon Europe that would fund global collaborations and global talent to attract and keep global talent from anywhere in the world. Now there's an ongoing discussion on exactly this point. Okay, so we've associated to Horizon Europe. Is it still worth keeping a perhaps smaller Discovery Fund for precisely these sorts of reasons, for attracting talent from the US, from China, from India, from anywhere in the world, and perhaps bringing them here or under this scheme? The problem, of course, is money, and the problem is, the envelope is not going to get any bigger. So anything that we commit under this fund is going to have to come out of the money that was ring-fenced for Horizon Europe. So I think in an ideal world, I'd say yes, but I think in practicality, when we think about where UK public finances are heading, it's going to be very difficult.
Simon, unless sort of following the logic of global Britain and convincing ministers that in this new world, they would be wise to commit a bit more UK funding to joint UK-China or UK-Indian or UK, Brazilian, choose your large country with large numbers of students and lots of links, research links to the UK. I mean, surely that's not an impossible, looking to ways of convincing government it's in their best interest. Beth or Wendy, would you like to join in on this one?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because there's two reasons that the UK might want to partner on a research basis with countries like China and India. I think one is that you want to use that research relationship and the UK's strength in research to create a diplomatic bond and as a form of soft power. But I think there's also a great reason to do it from a research perspective, that they are growing research powers themselves, and therefore that collaboration that we can foster will do good things both for the outputs of research and research in the UK. And I think it's really important that the UK government starts to think about, and actually for the universities in a sense too, to think about what is it that we want from those kind of partnerships. I see a bit of a risk that as we create more and more trade deals, that research may get added on in places in a kind of ad hoc manner, and because it's a nice thing to throw in, but without a real strategic sense of where we're going and which of those questions is it answering. Is it we're doing it to help diplomacy, or is it because we're doing it to help research? And I think if we got some more clarity on that strategic question, it would help us on a case by case make decisions. But Simon's right, lots of it will come down to cash at the end of the day. Potentially we have the research budget growing to 22 billion a year, which is a big increase, and that would be a great way to absorb some of that increase and to use that in a really constructive way. But we can make those choices and those expensive choices better if we know why we're doing it. And I think there's other countries that we might want to partner with too. So working out the right ones and doing it strategically is important.
Okay. Unless Wendy, you wanted to.
Well, I mean, I think it does make sense to, to look at other places. If you're looking, you normally want to be joining those who are growing, and obviously these countries are the future in terms of, the trends and speed with which they're developing. Thing is that the trade deals with every one of them has so many facets to it that where we'd get in the swings, roundabouts, and swaps, it would be hard to be confident. But I think the argument could certainly be made that we will benefit more proportionately by getting behind some of the institutions developing research. And there's, I was involved a little bit in India health developments, and they just, they would come up with some incredibly clever innovations at a fraction of the price that we were thinking of when we were doing work in medical research at McGill, and that's interesting, So I think it's worth looking at, but whether we will feature. I think China's just got a whole bundle of issues with this government that makes it tricky.
Well, I mean, there's a sort of gentle warning here for HE institutions, aren't there? That the government, a government led by many of similar people, was very enthusiastic about China not that long ago. And now I know everything's changed, but there's been a slight sense of all engines reversed since then. But I'll park that. That's my private thought. Bill Guest, this is a question which is sort of slightly building on the Horizon type research question, which is with reference to the rights of individual UK institutions to commercialise or participate in the commercialisation of UK and EU jointly funded R&D, are these rights likely to change as a result of Brexit? So it's a sort of moving on from science or medicine or indeed social science research to commercialisation. Is that do we know whether that's going to be affected by Brexit? Will it just make commercialisation between UK and EU partners more difficult? Do you know that, Beth, Simon?
I don't, sorry. I know that there were, in early drafts of the Horizon Europe regulation, there were references to commercialisation within the EU based on that funding. But I have lost track of where that debate got to and where we are in the text.
Simon, doesn't look, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a question mark here, as Beth said. There's a lot of tricky issues here that comes to property rights or from research, intellectual property. I don't think that's been sorted out yet. I'm not sure how that works under other association agreements to Horizon Europe. Plenty of states are associate states, but they're not. Association does not mean the same thing. Association means different things for different countries. There's not although the idea is to simplify this and have one form of association. I don't think they've quite got there yet. So I'm not sure yet what the IP consequences are for UK association, but we'll wait to see that once the deal has been done.
Okay, and also related to this, I've got a question. It's really a sharing of thought, really, but this is from Minha Pham, I hope I pronounced that, who is the science counsellor at the French Embassy, and with a contact detail, very kindly, thank you for that. I'm interested in hearing from LSE that belonging to alliances such as UNICA or maybe to the European Universities Project, 8 British universities are involved, I think those are the ones you listed, Simon, could help to be creative in terms of creating new ways to help student mobility. The French government is keen to maintain bilateral mobility of students and researchers in science and mobility. And that is an intriguing thought, is it, that whatever the EU and Britain and the EU do, it's possible that 27 member states and Britain might be able collectively to do more. Is that true, Simon?
I mean, I'm happy to go for that. I'm sure Wendy also has
Wendy, and I'll come to Wendy. On for Wendy coming out.
As I said, I think there was an instrumental reason for us to want to be part of Civica, and it was related to the framework it gave us, made it much easier for us to build up exchange programs, dual degree programs, double degree programs with these partners. We could have done it anyway without this initiative. We could, do the one-by-one bilateral agreements, but it just is much easier within a framework to provide resources to support that, to provide a timeline to deliver it, to sort of bring things together all at the same time. Undergraduate exchange programs, joint undergraduate degree programs, joint master's degree programs, joint PhD programs, and PhD. We have a framework which we're hoping to get from where we are now to somewhere very different in 4 or 5 years from now, which will be a much richer network of connections between us. And if we do have that, this kind of exchanges for our students and our faculty and our professional services staff within this network. So I agree. I think we don't see this as contradictory with us also building up global exchanges, but we think it will help us accelerate exactly those types of exchanges that Minha Pham talks about there.
And Wendy, you mentioned your Paris office or campus. Sounds like obviously an existing interest by the French government, but French government as the French government. But what about the university and France and other EU countries individually? Is this something you're giving thoughts to?
Well, we're certainly getting, more than thought. Some programs exist already that are, as I say, Queen Mary, King's have partnership agreements with us that are offering programs to students in Paris. Some of them are EU students, some of them are British students who want to have the experience of living in Paris to study. So it's possible, but to get it into the multilateral scale is I think much more interesting. As time goes on, you just get much more. Students are being given much more opportunities, and we have some undertakings and agreements with several universities within Paris, and we would hope that those could be built on. A lot of the questions that we're still kind of asking today, need to be worked out before we can be absolutely confident how that will develop. But I think there's definitely interest, and our experience of the diplomatic presence in Paris is they're really wanting this, really wanting to maintain those relationships and develop them. So I'm optimistic, and we do have parallel degrees and mutual degrees, pathways back to UK campuses from countries all over the world. So, those models I would think have been developed without the framework of the EU and may provide some ideas how to do it now that we don't have the EU's kind of structures to rely on.
And at a risk of a kind of an ignorant sounding question, and either you or Simon or Beth might know the answer to this, are kind of what you might call barter deals between countries of numbers of students going each way each year a legitimate way of doing this kind of thing? I mean, X numbers from British students to France, next number of French students to Britain. Is that something that doesn't get tangled in some sort of rules or other? As a way of getting around the different.
Wendy, do you want to go? It tends to be at the university level rather than the national level. It's very, very difficult to track at the national level. And this is part of, I think, a basket of tricky issues, which Wendy alluded to when she said the administrative burden of running these schemes is absolutely massive. Erasmus made that much easier because it was a sort of one size fits all. You take it off the shelf, this is what you did. Whereas, any agreement we have has to be a bilateral agreement between University A and University B, and they're all unique and they're all very particular, and they all allow, and you have to kind of police. It's almost impossible to do anything other than that. I don't know about Wendy's experience, but that's
clearinghouse though for these kind of schemes, so that more institutions can take part. Is that, Wendy? Could you not do this for your?
You're muted, Wendy.
Various
Sorry.
London. Thank you, Simon. I mean,
well, in the past, these sorts of schemes of student mobility, picking and choosing, programs, elements from across the University of London, those were done, and it's possible to do them. And it could be done on a inter-university basis or multi-university basis in Europe. What I, being still slightly new to the sector, I'll say though that the universities have to have a corporate capacity to make decisions. And I not that we, and that sometimes is tricky, because programs have their own proprietary nature of the specialness of them, and what credits are going to be mutually recognized and which students are going to get in, and how it's going to, how they're going to follow a pathway. These are decisions that we find even within our own institutions, sometimes labor intensive and time consuming. So once you get it on an inter-university level and a multidiscipline level, we're just going to have to get much more streamlined about it. I could guess it would be my view. I mean, at McGill, it used to drive us, it was quite tricky because, the law faculty, music, they all had their own special ways, and to kind of make those capable of entering into a single agreement, across many programs, it was done, but it was tricky.
Okay, I'm going to move on to another question from Astrid Favela, who is a student at the University of Oxford and an LSE alumna. It's aimed at Simon Hix, but I think I will ask the other two of my panelists to comment on this too. Do you think that negotiation for proceeding with a cherry-picking approach, now the deal is done, may be facilitated by the fact that education as a field with higher education is regarded as a soft power? And this term has come up several times this evening, really all three speakers have mentioned it. May this also be the reason why it's been neglected in the deal? So I think it's an interesting, because the idea of science, higher education, social science as a UK soft power, a really strong part of UK soft power, is not going to be one I suspect that the Foreign Office would require much convincing of. So looking ahead, do you think that now the things, the final January the 1st is past, that extending UK soft power in this way is going to be easier, particularly selling it as soft power? Maybe.
I mean, on the one hand, you could say that a lot of our services sectors have an element of soft power to them. I mean, education is surely one, but wouldn't you make the same argument about film, fashion, media, theatre?
I think it could apply to them. I think that's Astrid's question.
I mean, I think it applies to all of them, but hold on, Tony. So
sorry.
I think there's two reasons why I think these sectors were not thought about as part of the deal. One is these sectors weren't really in parts of the country or employing people who voted for Brexit. These are very concentrated in the southeast of England, very global, very European, very high skill, high talented. It's, industrial sectors in the north, the fisheries industry, these were the sectors that were driving Brexit. So of course they had the attention of the government. Secondly, services sectors don't fit very neatly into a trade deal. Trade deals mainly cover goods sectors, industrial sectors, tariffs, quotas, rules and regulations, product standards, and so on. Very, very limited services sector provisions in any global trade deal. So I think the attitude of the government was, you guys have you can figure out services sector yourself. You can figure out mutual recognition or develop these agreements bilaterally, multilaterally. Just get on with it yourself. And I'm, in a sense, I'm quite sympathetic to that.
Yeah, but surely science and medicine, higher education more generally, is interestingly one of the sectors that is spread out across the United Kingdom, including in the red wall areas, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. I mean, these are actually now slightly seen as more like London than they once were, but there are, and Edinburgh and Birmingham. So in a sense, soft power from a network of UK universities doesn't sound to me like something necessarily anti-levelling up. I mean, Beth, does that make sense to you? You must be funding institutions throughout the UK, I'm guessing.
We do, and I think we've seen that there's institutions across the whole of the UK that make a really valuable contribution to HE and to the research environment more broadly. We know that the government are thinking hard about levelling up and what that means for research and this idea of a place strategy. So it is something that's of national importance, and it will be critical to make sure that we can deliver that, because we know that there's more value to be had from research than we're currently getting. Whether that means that we have more potential to do this kind of sector deal carve-outs that as follow-ups to the main deal, I'm not sure. I think there's a challenge there, but I do think the sector should work really proactively to look at where can we solve problems either domestically or through more informal arrangements. And then as a last resort, if we do need to pin something down as that level of international agreement, let's put heads together and work out what that is and put proposals together, because it can't hurt to ask.
Can I ask Beth a question?
Yeah, of course, please.
Which is one of the things that, I concerns me is a potential conflict between the sort of place-based / levelling up agenda and the research quality excellence agenda. Now, I know there's a lot of colleagues in the rest of the country will say that's not fair, we're all excellent. I don't doubt that, that's true. Except there is a concentration of top quality, top class research institutions in the southeast of England. And I've had experience recently of, grant proposals being turned down by UKRI or other funders, where all the reviewers have said, this is absolutely outstanding, it's world class, it really should be funded. And then at the last minute, they decide not to fund it. And I suspect it's because it's a London-based project of London-based faculty, even if it's collaboration with Imperial or UCL or whatever. And so I do, whereas I'm rolling back 3-4 years ago, this is the type of thing that would have been funded. So is there a contradiction between a kind of place-based levelling up? I think there isn't a contradiction if all of us actually are moving up. There's a contradiction if there's a limited set of resources and we have to make choices. Then I think it's concerning for the general global competitiveness of British higher education.
Do you want to comment on that, Beth? I mean, because I've got a linked question for Wendy in a second, which actually takes us into the heart of this issue.
Let me do it briefly, because I can't solve that dilemma for the government. But I think you're right. The important thing is about raising all the boats on the tide. It's not about levelling some up and levelling some down and kind of meeting in the middle. And I think we have to be creative about the way that the UK finds to do levelling up. And not all of it is going to be about basic research. Some of it might be about how we link R&D to manufacturing better, for example. And there's some great examples in Sheffield where we've seen investment from industry and government investment come together to do really creative things that then create jobs. So I think it's not as simple a question of how do we balance out or spread around basic research funding more.
I mean, I can just say, as ever, there's always the risk, and you're right, Simon, that all these things are seen as zero-sum games. A rather interesting article by Martin Wolf in the Financial Times today about the need to have all parts of the UK functioning. And I do see in this debate always the slight risk of that we'll accidentally end up levelling down rather than levelling up, which is always kind of conceptual, well, not conceptually, but actually easier in policy terms. But one of the things it points to, and this is why I'm going to turn to Wendy for another question, is linking, further education and universities of different kinds in different parts of the country into networks that convinces the government that there is a cascade of ideas and the possibility of a cascade of people up and down, or within them, I should say within them, is a possibility. But I'm going to go to Lucy Parker's question here, who's another LSE alumnus. I'm not only choosing them today, but there are lots of them, which is good. So Lucy asks, the speakers have talked about HE building more alliances outside of HE with government, with other sectors, creative industries, etc. Can you feasibly see a massive growth in UK universities' civic agendas? And is the UK HE sector well placed? Does it have the appetite and resources to develop into a more impactful civic universities? I do think that links to the issue we've just been discussing. And Wendy, I know, is in the middle of an initiative precisely to do that. Wendy.
Thanks, Tony. Well, I think this is an agenda that we in London need to be firmly on. I think sometimes because of the global nature and excellence of the institutions within London, and the complexity of London's governance, it's always been tricky to engage in the civic agenda, but I think it's absolutely critical, because if there's a simple kind of political approach to this sort of settling up agenda, it will end up undermining the absolute world-class nature of the research that is funded. I mean, there is great research all over the country, but it doesn't all have to be the same. It's taken generations to get these centers of excellence where we have them, and to not build on that, strikes me as kind of nation limiting. So the civic agenda is key, and here in London, it is complex. There's a lot of us, and there's a lot of complex institutions, but there is huge importance at this point that we don't, that London doesn't get overlooked. It is at a serious state in the, given the post-COVID recovery challenge that it's going to face. The position on the financial services we've touched on, that's the heart of London. And unless there's some greater certainty about that sector, I think London is in peril. And, Tony will know this, I used to run Newham Council. So for me, if you add up all the poor people in London, they will soon rival the number of disadvantaged people in the rest of the country. There is serious and profound disadvantage in London in all realms, but in economic and educational terms as well. So I think it's really something that I'm putting our efforts into at the University of London across our member institutions, but I know that it will be also true of the wider HE sector. We're working with the Greater London Authority now on the plans for recovery. It's you think just any issue you want to touch, youth employment, labor market change. This is one where the universities really will have an opportunity to make an important difference. And I would also maybe just mention that, I've come from one of the regions just immediately between Montreal and London. I was in Norfolk, and, the university there, UEA, it is fiercely tied into the civic agenda. And when we used to go to bat in Whitehall for whatever we were after that particular moment, we fought like a pack, and and the university was firmly on side. And if you look at some of the research facilities that exist around Norwich as a result, you can see the payback. And I'd like to see us continue, doing that in the interests of the nation and of London itself.
I do think this is one. Simon, yes, you've been visiting other parts of the UK in your role, haven't you? And
yes, yeah, I have, and also the US. I'm very much agree with Wendy on that, and I've spoken to you, Tony, about this at LSE. I saw a very good presentation about the University of Chicago and what they do in Chicago in terms of their civic agenda. And they see it both in terms of outreach to schools to help schools upgrade what they're doing in education. They see it in terms of their undergraduate education and providing students getting their students involved in local civic projects. And they see it in terms of their research agenda, and part of their research agenda addressing local issues. And I remember, being frustrated a few years ago, Tony, when I was in the School of Public Policy and seeing all the students present their ideas for their projects that they were going to do as part of their Masters in Public Administration. And I remember a British student coming and talking about a project that they were going to do about homelessness in a town in Latin America. And I said, why is nobody wanting to do a project on homelessness in London? And it's just not sexy. It was ridiculous in a way. Here we are, a global social science institution, and very little of what we do is actually targeted towards some of the major social and policy challenges we face in our city that's right on our doorstep. So I absolutely agree with Wendy, and I think we really need to be doing more as universities, both in terms of our teaching and in terms of our student volunteering and in terms of our own research agenda.
Beth, do you have any thoughts on this one? I mean, I realise that you're a national institute or an international institution, but
just to echo the role that I think universities can play in their local area, and this idea that research is not of more value just because it's of global relevance. I think locally relevant research is so important, and we have to make sure that we have an incentive framework that also promotes that. So I think, yes, to universities playing a more civic role, but also looking at our policy and incentive structures and making sure that we value those things.
Okay, we're running up to 6:30. So Wendy, Beth, Simon, anything that you felt during the evening you should have said, or you'd like to get across in the last 2 minutes before I just apologise to the one or two people who haven't got their questions in this evening, but I want to finish on time. Wendy, any final thought?
Well, just really grateful to the LSE for hosting this event. I think it's really important. It is now the moment to move on. And because this agreement's been concluded in a sort of big rush and pretty thinly, there's a sort of sense in which this agenda can fall off the radar. And I really feel just from this discussion today, you can see how important it is that we get it back up there and we get HE in the center of it.
And Beth?
Yes, I think there's an opportunity to be seized, and it may not be where the sector would have chosen to be, but it's where we are. I think there is an opportunity there to grasp and actually forgetting the past and the grieving, as Wendy said, and being constructive partners with government, making the case forcefully and putting it out there, but being collaborative and helping them find the solutions in a constructive way will be really important to take us forward.
Simon?
Yeah, I guess what I find interesting about these debates about Brexit is you can say we could have tackled the place-based agenda, we could have talked about global alliances while we were a member state of the EU, but we didn't. And so what I welcome as part of the Brexit process is that we're having these debates now about the role of universities, the levelling up agenda, the global Britain and Britain's services sectors in the world. So in a sense, if Brexit has forced us to actually confront those sorts of policy challenges, I think that's potentially a good thing for higher education.
Okay, thank you for that too. And I apologise to Janet Ward at Heriot Watt, Maria Sino at UCL, Fernando Herrero at Birkbeck, Casey Bernard in Frankfurt, Alexander Gregor at the University of Portsmouth, and one or two others who I haven't been able to list there. So I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. Just to conclude, what I think is really interesting about this discussion is that there's a sort of strong sense that, as Tony Blair used to say, we are where we are, and that we can all think about how things might have been different or better or worse, but that we are here. And so the question of how to convince the UK government and UK opposition, by the way, that it's in their interest that some things are now done, because it's not only in their interest, but it's in the interest of, people across the UK and across the world. Actually, when you put it like that, not that difficult. And we just need to kind of apply ourselves a little bit more perhaps to thinking about, getting ideas across the government that suit us and suit them. I should just thank Rosie and Antigone and others behind the scenes, Kevin Featherstone, who was waiting just in case my line dropped out, which it didn't. So thank all my panel, Wendy, Beth, and Simon, and see you soon.